My name is Elena. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a pastry chef. For my entire adult life, I've believed I was stronger alone. I was wrong. I stood in the principal's office, my palms so damp they stuck to my lap. Across the desk, two perfectly dressed parents, Richard and Victoria Denton, looked at me like I was something they'd stepped in. They weren't just there to discuss a schoolyard push, they were there to judge my entire life. Victoria's voice was sharp, coated in fake sympathy. Children without structure act out, Miss Elena. No father figure. It's sad, really. She leaned in, her perfume suffocating. Some women simply aren't built to raise children alone. Heat climbed my spine, my jaw locked until it ached. Her husband, the lawyer, slid a single typed paper across the desk. It wasn't an apology, it was a confession. A document admitting I had failed as a mother, that my home was unstable. They thought they had me. A single, tired mother, cornered and humiliated. They had no idea that with one phone call, I could summon someone who would shatter their smug certainty. A man I hadn't spoken to in 20 years. If you've ever been told you're not enough, that your family isn't real because it doesn't fit their mold, this story is your armor. Smash that like button, because you are about to see what real protection looks like. I've spent my entire life building walls, not small ones, fortifications. I learned how from the very first man I ever trusted, my first teacher in the art of the exit, my own father, David. I was 13. I remember the exact shade of the late afternoon light hitting the linoleum. I walked into our kitchen, home from school, and the air was wrong. It was silent, but it was a loud silence. My mother, Clara, was at the kitchen table. Not sitting. More. Collapsed over it. She was holding a stack of papers, receipts, letters, photographs, proof of his affair. She wasn't sobbing. She was just shaking. A quiet, terrible vibration that seemed to run through the whole room. He didn't just betray us, he replaced us. One day he was there, complaining about the toaster, and the next, he was just gone. Vanished into a brighter, younger, newer life. He didn't even leave a note for me. He just left a stack of unpaid bills on the counter, a final insult. The gas bill, the electric, the mortgage. He left my mother with his debts, and me with a lesson branded onto my heart. A man's love has an expiration date. It isn't a question of if they leave, it's just a question of when. After that, life became a blur of survival. Mom worked 3 jobs. I barely saw her. She'd leave before I woke up, and I'd be asleep when she got home, the smell of industrial cleaning solution clinging to her coat thrown over the chair. We lived on cheap dinners, boxed macaroni, canned soup. I learned the specific shame of secondhand clothes that never quite fit right, that always smelled faintly of someone else's life. I learned how to be quiet, how to not ask for things. I learned not to hope for rescue, because no one was coming. I learned that silence can sound like dignity when all you have left is pride. I watched my mother work herself raw, her hands cracking and red, just to keep us afloat. And I made a second vow. I would never, ever, let a man have that kind of power over me again. I would never be weak. I would never be dependent. I would be my own rescuer. 3 years later, my mother remarried. I was 16, and I was furious. His name was Marcus. He was the complete, total opposite of my father. David was all chaotic energy, easy charm, and empty promises. Marcus was calm, he was stable, he was quiet, and he was successful. Not just comfortable, he owned, as I'd heard my mother whisper to a friend, half the real estate downtown. His stability terrified me. It felt fake. It felt unnatural. He'd come home every night at 6 o'clock on the dot. He'd sit at the dinner table and ask me about my day. He spoke to my mother with a steady, gentle kindness that felt like an act. It set my teeth on edge. My father's chaos was a storm I understood. This quiet, this was a different kind of power. And power, I had learned, always came with a catch. It always wanted something in return. So I built the wall higher. I perfected the art of the freeze-out. He'd say, "Good morning, Elena." I'd just nod, my eyes locked on my cereal bowl. He'd ask, "How was school?" "Fine." My mother, Clara, would plead with me in whispers. "He's a good man, Elena. He cares about you. Please, Just try. He doesn't even know me, I'd think. I never, not once, called him Dad. He was Marcus. Or, if I was talking to my friends, he was my mother's husband. I could see the small flinch in his eyes the first few times I said it. But he never called me on it. He never got angry. He just waited. His patience was almost worse than an explosion. It felt like a strategy. The real breaking point came when I was 17, staring at a mountain of financial aid forms. My stomach was in knots. I was trying to calculate how many lifetimes of waitressing it would take to pay for a culinary arts degree. He found me at that same kitchen table. He sat down, not too close, and slid a brochure for a prestigious, private university across the glossy wood. "I'd like to help with this, Elena," he said, his voice even. "Your mother and I. We want to pay for your tuition. All of it." I didn't feel gratitude. I felt rage. It was a hot, suffocating wave. I saw the strings. They were invisible, but I felt them wrapping around my throat. I saw the debt, not of money, but of obligation. Pay for me like I was a car, a piece of property? "I don't want your money," I spat the words. He looked genuinely confused. "Elena, it's not. It's a gift. There are no strings." "There are always strings," I shot back, my voice shaking. "I am not going to be something you bought. I am not going to owe you anything." I told him I would rather be in debt for the rest of my life than let another man think he owned a single piece of me. I chose the state school. I chose the loans. I chose the struggle. Because that debt, at least, was honest. The day I turned 18 was like a starting pistol. I'd had 2 suitcases packed and hidden under my bed for a month. I dragged them down the stairs. My mom was crying, hugging me, slipping $20 bills I knew she couldn't spare into my jacket pocket. Marcus stood in the doorway. He wasn't crying. He just looked sad. "Be safe, Elena," he said. "Call your mother. Often." He held out his hand. I just stared at it. Taking it felt like surrender. I wheeled my suitcases right past him. I ignored his goodbye. I walked out that front door, and as the humid summer air hit my face, I took my first real breath of what I truly believed was freedom. For the next 10 years, I proved I could do it. I proved I was right. I waited tables until my feet throbbed. I poured coffee at 5 a.m., the smell of burnt beans ground into my skin. I juggled double shifts while I paid for culinary school, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on caffeine and pure, unadulterated spite. And those stubborn student loans? They felt like a badge of honor. Every single payment I made was a tiny victory. See? I don't need you. I don't need anyone. I was independent. And I was profoundly, desperately isolated. I was 23 and exhausted when I met Alex. He was a graphic designer, one of those dreamer types who always had charcoal smudges on his hands and an easy smile. He'd come into the cafe where I worked my second job, sit for hours with a laptop and a single cold brew, and he just saw me. After years of making myself invisible, of being the unbreakable girl, he noticed. He didn't see the walls, he just saw the person hiding behind them. He made me laugh over spilled espresso. He'd wait for my shift to end, in the rain, just to walk me to the bus stop. He told me I was beautiful when I was covered in flour and smelled like stale coffee. He made life, which had always felt like a boulder I was pushing uphill, feel lighter. It was a slow thaw, terrifying, but for the first time, I let my guard down, just a crack. 6 months later, we were living together in a tiny apartment that always smelled like his turpentine and my baking experiments. 2 years after that, I was pregnant. When I saw the 2 pink lines, my first feeling wasn't joy. It was pure, cold sweat terror. This was a trap. This was dependence. This was the end. But when I told him, his face lit up. He was genuinely thrilled. He bought baby books. He started sketching out ideas for a nursery in the tiny corner of our living room. He'd talk to my stomach, telling the baby about all the museums he was going to take her to. He was convinced it was a girl. And I believed him. I let myself fall. I thought, this is it. My father was the exception. This is what real love feels like. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe miracles still existed for women like me. Hope can be a spectacular liar. The change was insidious. It started around the 5th month, just as I was starting to feel heavy and tired. His freelance projects started running late. Nights out with potential clients became more and more frequent. The man who used to sketch nurseries was now sighing with annoyance when I asked him to pick up milk on his way home. His texts, which used to be instant and full of life, became short, delayed. Okay, busy, later. The lightness he'd brought into my life was evaporating, leaving behind a cold, familiar dread that settled in my bones. I was 7 months pregnant. My ankles were swollen, my back ached, and I couldn't sleep. He'd fallen asleep on the sofa, again. His phone, on the coffee table, lit up. A name I didn't recognize. My heart didn't sink, it just stopped. My hands were shaking. I told myself not to. Don't look. Don't be that woman. Trust him. I picked it up. It wasn't just one message. It was weeks, months, flirty texts, plans to meet, photographs, and then the ones that shattered me. Comments about my body, jokes about how dull I'd become, how pregnancy wasn't sexy. The room tilted. My stomach didn't just turn cold. It felt like it had been filled with wet cement. I couldn't breathe. The confrontation was pathetic. I didn't scream. I couldn't find the air. I just held out the phone. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just looked annoyed, busted. He ran his hands through his hair, and he blamed me. He said I'd changed, that I was no fun anymore. And then, the exact words. I just need space, Elena. This is all just too much. He left with a half-empty suitcase and a disgusting, full sense of self-pity. He didn't even look at my stomach as he walked out the door. 6 weeks later, my daughter, Lily, was born. He wasn't there. He never called. He never sent a dime. He just disappeared. Erased. As if we had never existed. That was lesson number 2. The final lesson. As I sat in that sterile hospital room at 3 a.m., holding this tiny, perfect, 7-pound person, I stared out the window. The wall I'd let Alex chip away at. It didn't just get rebuilt. I cemented it. I added barbed wire. I added watchtowers. My father hadn't been the exception. He was the rule. Every man eventually leaves. It isn't a question of if, just when. And holding my daughter, I swore to God I would never, ever forget it again. My daughter, Lily, became my entire world. She is 10 years old now, and she's everything I'm not. She's not walled off. She's shy, but her heart is wide open. She's artistic, creative, just, pure sunshine. She trusts the world. I love that about her. And I built my life around protecting that light. I opened my small pastry shop. The hours were brutal, but it was mine. Every croissant, every cake, was a brick in the fortress of our life. A life I built, by myself, for us. For 20 years, the only man who'd ever shown me steady kindness kept trying to reach through the walls. Marcus. He never stopped. Birthday cards would appear in my mailbox, always with a generic return address, but I knew his handwriting. Little checks, $100 for Lily, tucked inside. I never cashed a single one. He'd call, maybe twice a year. Elena? Just checking in. Your mother worries. My voice would be clipped. We're fine, Marcus. Thanks. Click. I thought I was winning. I thought I was proving my point. Every ignored call, every return check, was a testament to my independence. I didn't see it for what it was. I didn't see I was punishing the only man who had never, ever let me down. The trouble started, as it always does, as a whisper. A new girl in Lily's class, Olivia Denton. You know the type. Her parents, Richard and Victoria, thought their money equaled morality. They lived in the biggest house in the district, and they raised a child who understood, instinctively, how to find a person's deepest wound and press on it. Olivia made my daughter her project. At first, it was just whispers, giggles when Lily raised her hand, being accidentally left out of party invitations. Then, Lily started coming home with a shadow over her. Her light was dimming. She'd be quiet at dinner, just pushing food around her plate. I pressed her. What's wrong, sweetie? Tell me. She'd just shake her head. It's stupid. Then, one rainy Tuesday, she came home, ran past me, and locked herself in her room. I heard one single, strangled sob. I sat outside her door for an hour. Finally, she let me in. Her face was streaked with tears, her cheeks blotchy and red. She finally told me. The words came out in a broken whisper. "Olivia Denton," she told everyone. She said, "What, honey?" She said, "You don't have a daddy because your mommy's a bad woman. That's why he left. That's why nobody wants you." The air left my lungs. It was a physical blow. The old, familiar, suffocating rage mixed with a pain so sharp it almost made me sick. I wanted to march to that school, find that child, find her parents. But I just held my daughter. I told her it was a lie. I told her Olivia was cruel and wrong. I emailed the teacher. I got a polite, useless response about interpersonal conflicts and building resilience. Lily tried to be brave. She buried herself in her art. She was working on a project for the school art fair. A butterfly sculpture, made of wire and delicate, painted silk. She'd spent weeks on it. It was beautiful, intricate. It was all her light, all her hope, made into a physical object. The day of the art fair, she was so excited. She carefully carried it in a box. I got the call 2 hours later. I found her in the art room, the butterfly. It was just a pile of twisted wire and torn, smeared silk on the floor. A teacher's aide told me what happened. Olivia had accidentally bumped the table. But another child, a quieter one, told me the truth. Olivia had walked up to it. She'd looked at Lily. And she sneered, "Fatherless girls don't deserve to win anything." Then, with one calculated swipe, she'd swept it onto the floor and crushed it under her shoe. And that was when something in my daughter finally broke. All the weeks of whispers, the taunts, the humiliation, it all focused into one white-hot point. Lily pushed Olivia. She pushed her hard. Olivia, who had never been so much as touched in her life, fell back, scraped her knee on a chair, and ran screaming to the office, crying assault. And that's all it took. The phone rang the next morning. It was early. I hadn't even opened the shop yet. Principal Harrison. His voice wasn't warm or concerned. It was clipped. Administrative. "Miss Elena, we need to speak immediately about an incident involving your daughter." An incident. When I arrived at the school, the air in the waiting area was thick. The secretary wouldn't meet my eyes. I was shown into his office. And they were already there. The Dentons. Richard and Victoria. They looked, as the transcript said, like they were court-bound. He was in a perfectly tailored suit, checking his watch. She was in a crisp white dress, her hair immaculate. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. And Victoria's perfume. It was so strong. A heavy, expensive, floral scent that filled every corner of the small office. It was suffocating. It was a power move. I am here. I take up space. They both looked at me in my jeans and my flour-dusted chef's jacket with a barely concealed smirk. Principal Harrison, a man I'd previously found reasonable, looked deeply uncomfortable. He kept adjusting his tie. "Miss Elena, thanks for coming. We have a serious matter to discuss." "I understand," I started, my voice shaking just a little. I'd prepared for this. I sat down, opened my bag, and stayed calm. "But I think we need to talk about the context. My daughter has been the target of sustained bullying by Olivia for weeks." I explained everything. The taunts, the whispers, the isolation. I held up my phone. I have emails I sent to the teacher. I have texts from my daughter begging me to let her stay home. This wasn't an unprovoked attack. This was a child finally breaking. I was about to show him the texts when Victoria's voice just sliced through mine. "Enough," she said. Not loudly, just crisply, like she was dismissing a servant. I stopped. "Your daughter," she said, turning her cold eyes on me, "attacked mine. She pushed her to the ground. That is violence. I don't care what context you want to invent." I blinked, stunned by the venom. She was defending herself. After months of... Victoria leaned forward. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. Those glittering, assessing eyes. "Children without structure act out, Miss Elena. It's sad, really." She glanced at my chef's jacket. "No father figure, just you." clearly overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. The word hung in the air, thick and stinging, like her perfume. She wasn't done. She tilted her head, a perfect pantomime of sympathy. Some women, she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, simply aren't built to raise children alone. That hit harder than a fist. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. A sudden, cold vacuum in my chest. The blood drained from my face. My pulse wasn't just fast, it was roaring in my ears, hot and loud, drowning out the sound of the office clock. My hands, resting on my bag, went numb. She had taken all my private fears, all the old, deep wounds left by my father and by Alex, and served them to me in a principal's office, all while smiling. This wasn't about a push, this was an execution. Her husband, Richard, the lawyer, took his cue. He slid a single, neatly typed paper across the principal's desk. "We're prepared to keep this incident out of the police system," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "If you sign this," I stared at the paper. It wasn't an apology, it was a confession. It was a legal statement admitting that I, Elena, had failed as a mother, that my unstable home environment had directly caused Lily's unprovoked aggression, that I accepted full responsibility for my poor parenting. My voice was barely a whisper. "You want me to say I'm a bad mother?" Victoria tilted her head. "We'd like you to take accountability, dear. Maybe consider a parenting class. Every child needs a man around. That's just biology." I looked at Principal Harrison, pleading. He looked at the floor. He looked at the Dentons. He looked at their expensive clothes and their expensive, threatening aura. He cleared his throat. "Miss Elena, until you sign this document and demonstrate remorse, Lily will remain suspended. We cannot allow violent students back without consequences." I sat there, frozen, gutted, humiliated. They weren't just punishing Lily, they were punishing me, for being single, for being abandoned, for getting up every day and surviving alone. They were saying the cruelty I had endured was my fault. And now, my daughter was paying the price. I left the office in a daze. I didn't sign the paper. I don't think I even said goodbye. I just walked out. I got into my car and sat in the parking lot, the sound of my own breathing harsh and loud in the silence. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't get the key into the ignition. I just gripped the steering wheel, staring at the school's bland brick wall. Humiliated, erased. All I could smell was Victoria's perfume. It was in my hair, on my clothes, in my lungs. I felt like I was suffocating on it. I don't remember the drive home, it's a blank. But I remember walking in my front door. The house was too quiet. Lily was waiting for me. She was sitting on the bottom step of the stairs, her knees drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. Her face was swollen and blotchy, her eyes red, raw. She'd been crying for hours. She looked up when I came in, her eyes so big, so wounded. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask if she was in trouble. She just looked at me with this awful, quiet despair. And she asked the one question that finally, utterly, destroyed me. She whispered, "Mommy, why doesn't my daddy protect me?" I had no answer. I had nothing. My throat closed. I just stared at her, my beautiful, brave little girl, finally broken by the world's cruelty. And then she whispered the follow-up. The dagger that pierced every wall I'd ever built. "Am I suspended?" Her voice was so small. Is it because Olivia is right? Is it because you're a bad woman?" A bad woman, that was it. It wasn't a thought, it was a sound, a crack, like ice splintering in my chest. My vision tunneled. The walls of my hallway seemed to rush in, the air sucked out of the room. I couldn't feel my hands. My father's abandonment, Alex's betrayal, Victoria's smug, cold smile. It all connected in one, blinding, agonizing flash. Some women simply aren't built to raise children alone. I had spent my entire life building these walls, proving I was strong, proving I didn't need anyone. And in that moment, staring at my daughter's broken face, I saw the truth. My walls hadn't protected us. They had failed us. They had isolated us. I wasn't failing my daughter because I was single. I wasn't failing her because I was a bad woman. I was failing her because I was too proud, too scared, too damaged to ask for help from the one man who had been offering it, quietly and steadily, for 20 years. My pride wasn't strength, it was a cage, and it was suffocating my child. The crack became a flood. I didn't think. I moved. I walked past Lily, straight into the kitchen, my hands trembling. But it wasn't from weakness anymore. It was from fury. I grabbed my phone from the counter, my thumb swiped across the screen, past Alex, do not call. I scrolled, all the way down, to a contact I hadn't called in 2 decades, Marcus. My thumb hovered over the name. The old fear screamed, he'll say no, he'll say, I told you so, he'll hang up. I looked at Lily, still huddled on the stairs, the living proof of my failure. I pressed the call button before I could talk myself out of it. It rang. Once. My heart hammered against my ribs. It rang twice. He's not going to answer. He answered. Elena? His voice. It was just steady. Older, yes. But calm. Like he'd been waiting for this call my entire life. I couldn't speak. A strangled sob just tore out of my throat. Elena, what's wrong? His voice sharpened, anxiety cutting through. Are you okay? Is Lily okay? And it all came out. A desperate, humiliated flood of words. The bullying, the art project, the office, the perfume, the confession, the words bad woman, the suspension. My daughter on the stairs. I was rambling, hysterical, and I finally just choked out, I don't know what to do. There was a silence on the other end. Not a long one, but it was dense. A cold, heavy silence. Then, his voice came back, and it was a voice I had never, ever heard before. It wasn't calm, it wasn't gentle. It was ice, pure, controlled, absolute fury. Elena, he said, and his voice was so sharp it cut right through my panic. Listen to me, carefully. I stopped crying. I just listened. You are my daughter. Lily is my granddaughter. He paused, and I heard him take a single, deep, steadying breath. Those people have just made a profound miscalculation. Do not sign anything, Marcus said, his voice flat and cold. Do not speak to them. I will be at your house in 10 minutes. We will go to the school tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. He hung up. I stood there, phone in my hand, the kitchen silent again. But the silence was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. The next morning, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept. I just sat in the living room, watching the numbers on the clock change. I got Lily dressed, my hands still shaking. Who was on the phone, Mommy? She'd asked. Just a friend, sweetie. Everything is going to be okay. I don't know which one of us I was trying to convince. At 8:55 a.m., we stood on the sidewalk in front of the school, the same parking lot I'd sat in, shaking, less than 24 hours earlier. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. It wasn't flashy, it was just expensive. Solid. Marcus stepped out. I hadn't seen him in person in God, maybe 10 years. He was older. His hair was more silver than I remembered, but he wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly. He looked exactly like what he was, a man with power, money, and zero tolerance for injustice. He walked over to me, his face set. He didn't say, I told you so. He didn't say, it's about time you called. He just looked at me, then at Lily. Then, he placed a firm, warm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a light touch, it was an anchor. Solid ground. Through his suit, I could feel the absolute stillness of his presence. For the first time in 20 years, the transcript said, I didn't feel alone. He gave me a single, firm nod. Let's go. We walked into that office together. The Dentons were already there, sitting in the same chairs, looking smug. Victoria gave me a little, tight smile. Richard was tapping on his phone. They were ready for round 2 of my humiliation. Principal Harrison sat behind his desk, the confession paper waiting. He looked up, ready to force my signature. And his face went white. It didn't just get pale, it was the color of chalk. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He recognized Marcus instantly. Everyone in this city who mattered knew who Marcus was. He funded half the district's programs. He sat on the advisory committee. He was untouchable. Mr. Marcus, Harrison stammered, scrambling to his feet, knocking a penholder over. I didn't realize you were. Marcus didn't shake his hand. He just calmly took the seat across from the Dentons and gestured for me and Lily to sit beside him. I'm Elena's stepfather, Marcus said, his voice quiet, but it filled the entire room. And I'm Lily's grandfather. He looked at Harrison. I understand, he said, the words perfectly level. There's been some confusion about accountability here. Victoria Denton, still arrogant, still not understanding the power shift, smiled that tight plastic smile. We're simply asking for an apology for Lily's violent behavior, sir. Surely you understand the need for discipline. Marcus turned his head and looked at her. He didn't just glance, he looked at her. He held her gaze with that devastating, cold calm. Mrs. Denton, he said, let me clarify something. Your daughter has spent weeks psychologically tormenting my granddaughter. She used deeply personal, cruel, and slanderous insults about her family. When your daughter destroyed Lily's property and mocked her for being fatherless, Lily defended herself. He leaned forward, just an inch. That is not violence. That is self-preservation. Richard Denton, the lawyer, finally put his phone down. He cleared his throat. Now, with all due respect, Mr. Marcus, the fact is, you're— And you, Marcus interrupted, his voice like steel. He turned his gaze to Richard. The lawyer visibly recoiled. You've been complicit. Spreading malicious gossip about my daughter's character. You sat in this office and called her inadequate, a bad woman. You attempted to coerce her into signing a fraudulent document, under duress, admitting to being an unfit mother. Marcus let the words hang in the dead silent room. That, Mr. Denton, is defamation. And I don't tolerate it. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. Victoria's smugness was gone. Her face was as white as Harrison's. Richard looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. Marcus turned back to Principal Harrison. Here, he said, is what's going to happen. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a list of terms. 1. You will reinstate Lily immediately, with a formal, written apology from the school for failing to protect her from documented bullying. 2. The Dentons will issue a separate written apology to both Elena and Lily for the harassment and defamation. 3. Their daughter, Olivia, will be required to attend a mandatory bullying intervention program. If she refuses, she is expelled. And 4, Marcus said, standing up. If any of this is refused, if I hear one more whisper against my family, I will take this matter to the school board, the local media, and my personal attorneys, who will be filing suit for defamation and emotional distress. Your choice. Principal Harrison looked like he might faint. Mr. Marcus, I'm sure we can resolve this. Then resolve it. Now. 20 minutes later, I walked out of that school. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't dizzy. I was just breathing. I walked out into the bright sunlight, holding a formal apology letter in my hand. Lily's suspension was gone. The confession was ripped to shreds in Harrison's trash can. We got to the car. Marcus opened the back door for Lily, who was, for the first time in weeks, smiling. He closed her door and turned to me. He squeezed my shoulder, that same solid, anchoring grip. You're a great mother, Elena, he said, his voice finally warm again. Don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise. I just nodded. I couldn't speak. In that moment, I finally understood. He didn't just win a fight. He didn't just save my daughter. He gave me back my dignity. He tore down the walls I'd been hiding behind my entire life. He proved that family isn't about blood. It's not about who you're born to. It's about who shows up. If you think Marcus is the definition of a real father, smash that like button. If this story gave you chills, drop a comment telling me what you would have done. And make sure you subscribe, because every week, we bring you stories where justice isn't just served, it's delivered with precision. See you in the next one.